Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weber. As we close out 2025 and look forward to all that 2026 will bring, it's important for university leaders to look both ways to see how fast the college sports and higher education landscape is changing. What do we know now that we didn't know a year ago? What are the key legal decisions that we should keep an eye out for 2026? Here to talk about all this and so much more is Gabe Feldman, director of the Tulane Sports Law Program and Tulane University's Associate Provost for NCAA Compliance, amongst many other things. Gabe is one of the leading voices in the country in the exploding field of sports law. He was named the Paul and Abram B. Barron Associate Professor of Law in 2015, and he co-founded and co-directs the Tulane Center for Sport. He's also the host of the very popular Sports Wise podcast. Gabe, welcome to my podcast, and congrats to Tulane for making the college football playoff.
Thank you very much, Karen. It is a pleasure to be back on with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So how excited is Tulane right now? I mean, they got to be over the moon.
We are over the moon. It is hard to believe how far we have come to become a football school plus, not just football school, but to have 4 conference championship appearances in a row and now make it to the college football playoff. After we beat, you might remember USC in the Cotton Bowl a couple of years ago, which was one of the greatest modern college football games of all time. So we are quite excited about Tulane football.
And let me see, who did not get into the college football playoff? I might have heard of that school. Was it Notre Dame?
Yeah. And my alma mater, Duke, also left out despite winning the conference. So it's a wild time in college football.
It really is. Okay, so we're going to start with that. I posted a tongue-in-cheek comment on LinkedIn. I want to get your response. I think every Division I school to remain Division I now has to have a billionaire on speed dial. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I would say 2 things. One, I like that you call it speed dial still, like back when that was a thing, when you actually had to dial all the numbers as opposed to just pushing a thing. So look, I don't know that. Yes, I think directionally that is the case right now, because as you know as well as anyone, the costs of maintaining a competitive, and let's be honest, it's a competitive FBS football team, are higher than ever. And at least for now, there's no signs of it slowing down, because although we do have the House settlement, and in theory, we have a limit on how much the schools can pay directly to the athletes, there is the outside NIL issue we are dealing with. But the elephant in the room, frankly, so much of the conversation is about spending on college athletes and how we can afford to spend on college athletes, and coaching salaries continue to skyrocket and buyouts continue to skyrocket. And the Knight Commission has put out a study of just the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent to pay coaches not to coach. We saw here in my home state of Louisiana that the governor got involved and was very unhappy when LSU fired Brian Kelly and had to pay him a buyout and said, we're not going to do that anymore. And then they turn right around, hire a new coach. Not only is he is the school on the hook for a higher buyout, but with no offset. So if they do fire him, then not only do they have to pay him a significant amount of his salary, but if he gets a job somewhere else, they continue having to pay him. So, and I'm not blaming LSU. I'm not blaming any individual school or any individual coach. It's the system we have. And so when you're trying to compete for elite athletes, elite coaches, elite administrators, not to mention the facilities, you need a lot of money. And so whether it's one billionaire or several hundred millionaires or whatever the case may be, yes, the cost of college sports has never been higher. And let me just add one thing, because I want to practice what I preach. Tulane won a conference championship in cross country track. So we are doing really well in sports other than football as well. And we pride ourselves on that. And I know you take that very seriously. And I love to see great field hockey as much as I love to see great football. So that's why I think we are here. And it's just all of the focus and most of the money is on college football. So that's where a lot of the conversation is.
It is. And of course, we know that those 2 sports, as many others, it's an Olympic pipeline. And that's such a critical part of who we are as a nation. Okay, so speaking of billionaires, a couple of weeks ago you had Cody Campbell on your Sports Wise podcast. For the listeners, the presidents, and others who don't know, tell us briefly who he is and why you had him on the podcast.
So Cody Campbell is a fascinating figure in college sports. He is a former football player at Texas Tech, is on the board, or might be chairing the board at Texas Tech, and also happens to be a multi-billionaire and a very influential political figure. And he has made it part of his mission to try to reform college sports. And his platform, his pitch has basically been that he wants to protect Olympic sports and women's sports, and also wants to, and I don't think he hides this, wants to ensure that many schools have an opportunity to compete at the highest level in college football, including Texas Tech. And the reports are that Texas Tech has spent around $40-ish million on its football roster this year. At least some of that money has come from Cody Campbell. So Cody Campbell has spent a lot of money in trying to ensure the success of Texas Tech athletics, and has been very involved in lobbying for reform in Congress, and was originally opposed to a piece of legislation called the SCORE Act, and then supported it. And now that the SCORE Act, and we might talk about this later, is at least temporarily on hold, I do think Cody Campbell. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that he is one of the most influential figures in college athletics right now.
And he's the chair of the Board of Regents
Right.
of Texas Tech.
At
So there's
Texas
been a
Tech.
lot of
Yep.
there's been a lot of anxiety, particularly in the Big Ten, about what the trustees and regents understand about this landscape, that they're not being fed just good news, but they're also being fed the realities of things.
Right.
Do you feel like
Right.
Cody understands that?
I do. I think Cody has spent a tremendous amount of time studying these issues, and whether you agree or disagree with him, he is extremely thoughtful and very smart. Again, I disagree with some of his the premises. I disagree with his interpretation of the Sports Broadcasting Act, which we might want to get into in terms of pooling TV revenue. But I don't think that that anything you might disagree with Cody, it's because of a lack of understanding or intellect or passion or care. He really cares. He's really thoughtful about it. I think he is trying to learn. So again, whether you disagree with him or agree with him, I believe he's going about it the right way in terms of educating himself.
Okay, so great segue. We hearing all of a sudden, I feel like I'm a television nerd from back in the 60s talking about the Sports Broadcasting Act. But what is it and why is it so important now?
So, Sports Broadcasting Act was passed in 1961, and the reason it came to be is because way back in the day, the NFL decided, when they were a very small business, that they would be better off if they pooled their television revenue and had one national television deal. And that would be the best way to support all of the teams to make sure that they were a sustainable league. Because unlike other industries where Coke would like nothing more than to drive Pepsi out of business, the Giants want to beat the Packers on the field, but they don't want to drive the Packers out of business, because there is no NFL unless you have a league of teams that are relatively evenly matched, that have financial wherewithal to support players, that have fans that want to watch. And the NFL's first effort to try to pool these broadcast rights was struck down as illegal under antitrust law by a federal judge. And so the NFL went to Congress and said, look, we have this great thing, but we can't have it unless you give us an antitrust exemption. And we are different from other industries because we're not trying to drive each other out of business. And so Congress passed the Sports Broadcasting Act, which gave an antitrust exemption to professional sports leagues. The NCAA was not included, in part because the NCAA said, we don't need that. We're not a pro sports league. We have our own protection. So they gave them an antitrust exemption to pool their TV rights, to share that revenue if they wanted to. The one condition, a pretty significant condition, was that it only applied to television broadcasts that were on free over-the-air television.
Right.
Now, that wasn't a big ask at the time because there really wasn't much other than free over-the-air television in 1961. But that's very clearly in the law. That has been challenged many times over the last now 60 plus years. And every court that's looked at it has said, no, this only applies to free over-the-air television. Doesn't apply to your cable package, doesn't apply to Sunday Ticket, doesn't apply to streaming. So the NFL is currently in the midst of now years-long litigation about their pooling of broadcast rights for their Sunday Ticket, which was originally on DirecTV, now YouTube TV. And they argued we should be protected under the Sports Broadcasting Act, and the court said no. You have to defend this in court as a potential antitrust violation. They originally lost and had a $4.7 billion verdict against them that has since been overturned. But the NBA, the NHL, Major League Baseball, they've all faced lawsuits over their television packages, even though they are protected by the Sports Broadcasting Act, because that protection only goes so far. And what Cody Campbell has pushed for, what's part of the CARA Act, what's part of the SAFE Act, what many have pushed for is saying, let's amend the Sports Broadcasting Act to include college sports so that the colleges can pool their broadcast rights, share that revenue, and have a more national schedule that you won't have big games competing with each other. And so you can maximize revenue and then use that revenue to support all of the rising expenses that we've talked about. Again, the problem with that is that the Sports Broadcasting Act would not apply to the ESPN broadcast or any streaming broadcast or anything else, because that's not free over-the-air television. And if you want that protection, then you'd have to amend the SBA even further. And I don't know that there's an appetite to give pro leagues even more control over their broadcast rights. So it's a very complicated area, and it's a very arcane law that most people don't know about and haven't talked about it since the 1960s. But it has become front and center as a way to try to generate more revenue for universities.
Okay, so in the language of college sports today, one of the emerging measurements is viewership data.
Right.
Does the NFL factor in viewership data, or is it just one big pot of money that then is equally distributed amongst the 32 teams?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the NFL is unique because they do not, unlike the NBA, Major League Baseball, and National Hockey League, and all of our other major professional sports, men's and women's, they only have a national TV deal. There are no local broadcast deals other than radio and preseason games for NFL teams.
Okay.
So that does not matter your viewership. The 32 NFL teams have agreed to share that national television revenue equally. They also share a lot of other revenue equally, or close to equally, in terms of the sale of their IP. And if you buy your favorite player's jersey, if he's on the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Jaguars get a share of that, but so do all the other 31 NFL teams. And so it is designed to make sure that it's not a league of 8 teams in the biggest markets, that we want to have a national football league, and we want fans of the Green Bay Packers and the Indianapolis Colts to believe that their team has a chance to win, if not every Sunday or Monday or Tuesday or Thursday or Friday, wherever the game is on, but at least every year or 2 or 3.
Right.
And the NFL has done a wonderful job of that, because if the Green Bay Packers are in the Super Bowl, people are excited. People don't say, oh, we have to deal with another small market team. And that's in part because that with a hard salary cap, or hardish salary cap, and revenue sharing of that national television deal, the teams are on a relatively even playing field, right? Some can spend more than others. In the NBA, it's similar. There's a national TV deal that is shared, but each team has a local TV deal. And so the Lakers' local TV deal is significantly larger than the Pelicans' local TV deal. So the Lakers are able to make a lot more money off of their local deal. You could have a system one way or the other like that in college sports, where you just divide it all up, or you could do it based on viewership, or you could do it that there's some national deals and then some local deals. There's lots of different ways to do it, but the NFL is a unique model, and they were able to pull that off because the Mara family, other families back in the 1960s said, this is good for the league overall.
Yeah.
It may not be the best for our individual team, but in order to have the Giants, we need the NFL. And it also helped that the dollars were a fraction of what they are today, so they weren't giving up quite as much money as they would be if they were asked to do that today.
I sort of remember too, in reading about that there was a governor in Louisiana,
yes,
who decided to vote on the bill in favor because then New Orleans was going to get an NFL franchise.
That's yes, Mr. Boggs, and thank you to the Senate for granting us the expansion franchise in New Orleans. But yes. The politics of all of it are sort of mind-boggling, and we're getting to see a little taste of that with what's going on with college sports legislation and how many
Yes.
different interests are involved and how much of this is political. But yes, there there are some wild stories from the 1960s about this legislation and related legislation.
Absolutely. All right. So that's one thing that presidents should have a distant eye on. But what other things in 2025 really changed from 2024 on the legal side of things?
Yeah, well, certainly the House settlement, I think it kind of has to start and it won't end with that, but has to start with that um, the settlement itself fundamentally shifted the relationship between college athletes and universities. And there was a lot that came before that with the passage of various NIL laws at the state level. There was the Alston case, which, to be very clear, was not an NIL case. It was about education related benefits, but it did scare the NCAA a little bit more into wondering whether they could win these future antitrust cases. And then you add in the state legislation, you add in really, I think the feeling throughout the country among many that it didn't make sense to continue restricting the ability of college athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness. Not only as billions of dollars were flowing through the college sports system, but as millions of dollars were flowing through the social media influencer system. And everybody but college athletes were able to participate in both of those.
Mhm.
And so that eventually leads to, and there's an overlap in the timing, but the House case being filed and the House settlement, which formalized the ability of schools to pay college athletes directly. And you've talked about this many times on your podcast. That 22% of that defined set of revenue, and then creates this other model that really mirrors what pro sports look like, where you have a cap on what the schools can pay the players directly. The players can then do their own NIL deals, but they have to be legitimate NIL deals.
Right.
And there's not a lot of discussion of that at the pro level until this year with what's going on with the Los Angeles Clippers and the potential
Yes.
cap circumvention
Mhm.
there. But it's supposed to be a similar system. And then, again, as you've talked about many times, it did eliminate scholarship limits and replace them with roster limits. So schools at different levels have had to figure out how they want to manage that. And schools outside of the Power Four that had a choice to opt in or opt out of that revenue sharing and roster limit model. So that's I think unquestionably been the biggest issue and the biggest change in the college sports landscape, not only in the last year, but maybe in the last 100 years.
Yeah, for sure. I compare it to Title IX. I think it's
Yeah,
that's momentous.
yeah.
What else happened this year that presidents ought to just know? Okay, that's coming down the pike. That's what we're thinking about.
Yeah, so I'd say a couple other things. I'll start with is you just mentioned Title IX. I think it's not new, but the question of does Title IX fit into this new landscape?
Right.
And there has been enough, and you know this as well as anybody, enough challenges for schools to comply with Title IX as we've known it in terms of providing equitable participation opportunities, financial aid, and then that laundry list of treatment and benefits.
Right.
But then when you add in 20 million in revenue sharing or whatever it might be, if it's $200,000, whatever the number is, and it's different whether you're at the top of the FBS or another school that doesn't have as many resources, does that money have to be distributed equitably according to Title IX? And what does it mean to be distributed equitably? Can you rely on the fact that, well, the football team is on TV more, so they're generating more revenue? Generally, the answer to that has been no. The market is not a defense to Title IX, in part because the market may be skewed because of the historical discrimination against women's sports. So you can't say, well, nobody's coming to watch the women's sports when you weren't promoting the women's sports and you were scheduling the games in the middle of the day and the men got to play at night in the prime time and they had better facilities. So the implications of Title IX and the inevitable lawsuit challenging the distribution of this revenue. We haven't seen it yet, but
Yeah.
I've talked to some of the plaintiffs' lawyers, have been on my podcast, and they've talked about this publicly, that they don't believe that sharing 90% ish of that revenue with male athletes, which would be the football team and the men's basketball team, and then 10% among the rest of the athletes, some are who are female athletes, they don't believe, or many of them don't believe, that is permissible under Title IX. We haven't had a direct challenge to it yet, but I would imagine it's only a matter of time before we do see it. Now, there have been some cases, in the case involving the University of Oregon, that have mentioned or brought in um, NIL as part of it, but that's more focused on the publicity that the school has given to the athletes, which might suppress their ability to generate to generate NIL money, but
Mhm.
whether the school has to provide an equitable opportunity to the athletes to get this money is one question. But when the school itself is paying the money directly to the athletes, many people are questioning whether that has to be scrutinized under Title IX. And if that does have to be, and again, let's just assume for sake of simplicity and sake of argument that has to be distributed equally. That Title IX doesn't say equally, but let's just say it ends up having to be 50-50. That
Mhm.
changes a lot of
Sure
way
does.
schools are spending.
Sure does.
And that could be certainly a boon for female athletes. But is a question of how schools will react to that and what it means sort of downstream and what it means to the future of not only women's sports and football, but I think Olympic sports more broadly.
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you this as a side note. How concerned are you about the basically dismantling of the Department of Education, especially in its ability to oversee some of these areas? It seems insane.
Don't get don't get me started on that. I mean, yeah, I am very concerned.
Yeah,
I'm very concerned on a whole host of levels, not just involving college athletics.
yeah,
But again, you know this better than anybody that these are college sports, and you can say, well, that they are professionalized now, and some are, but ultimately these are sports being played on college campuses by college students, and if education is not a part of this, then I don't know what we're doing,
yeah.
and I don't know why we're doing it. So I just don't think, and I hope we don't completely separate out education from college sports. It may be headed that way for FBS football, but
Mm.
for the significant majority of athletes, it's not that way. It's never been that way. And if you totally eliminate any oversight of the operations of college athletics and whether it fits in with Title IX, whether it fits in with the broader educational mission of a university, I think we're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I think so too. What do you say to the folks who say, well, maybe football should just break away? My question is, and I don't know what you've seen legally in any of this, but could we survive as a national organization under the NCAA or somebody else without college football writ large? Not the funding, because we know it doesn't come to the NCAA, but just the spectacle of college football. How could the rest of college sports survive with that?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, but I think there are a lot of ways to look at this, and a couple of the economists who worked for the plaintiffs in the antitrust cases against the NCAA, every time they would run into the argument that we can't afford to pay the football players because we need to subsidize all the other sports on campus. And one of their answers, and it wasn't a perfect answer, but one of their answers, well, look at D3 sports, where D3 does have football, but they also have other sports, and D3 football is not making money. That they are just finding a way to support those programs. Now the costs are much lower there, so
Mhm.
it's not an apples to apples comparison. But I think there is a way to have high level collegiate sports on campus without football. You could look at the Big East. You could look at the
Yeah.
basketball centric schools that do this, but on a broader scale, on a national level. The Knight Commission came out with a proposal 5 years ago, and I am, just to be clear, although I'm a consultant for the Knight Commission, I'm not here right now speaking on behalf of the Knight Commission, but I think they do great work, whether I'm involved with it or not. And they had recommended and proposed a separate governance structure for college football and for big time college football.
Yeah.
Spin it off, because there's so many of the issues that are plaguing college sports are really being caused by college football. And college football just has different interests and different needs and different legal risks than most other sports on campus. So if you spun it off, don't eliminate it from the campus, but you spin it off so there's a separate governance so they can say this is what's best for college football, but it may not be best for college lacrosse or swimming and
Mhm.
diving. Um, and you recognize, look, football is generating all this revenue, but the NCAA is not getting it, and the schools outside, for the most part of the Power Four, are not getting it, and yet the House lawsuit, most of the damages or a majority of the damages were paid out to FBS college football players.
Right.
And if you think
Right.
about all the concussion litigation, you think about all the legal risk and all of the costs that the NCAA bears for college football, maybe let's say this is not a divorce. It's just you're better off if you govern yourselves and then we can govern everybody else over here. But
Mhm.
let's stay under the broader umbrella and let's incentivize schools to say, give a portion of that money, that new money you're generating, to support the other sports on campus.
Yeah,
because the revenues are exploding. We know this, and we know with the new college football playoff deal and with new conference television, there's money there. And I believe for the most part, college sports doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. And
sure.
there's enough money there. You just need to figure out where you're going to spend it. So I think there is a world. So I'm fighting your hypothetical a little bit, but there's
Okay.
a world where you do separate out football, but you still use football to help the rest of the
Yeah,
university and the rest of the athletic department. So you don't have to live without it. You don't have to eliminate it. I think
right.
you just have to recognize that it's different, and maybe it should be treated differently.
And I don't think a lot of people outside of the industry really understand how much the NCAA and the institutions absorb the
Right.
costs for football, as
Right.
particularly with all the lawsuits and everything
Right.
else.
Right.
Um, okay, so we're looking forward to 2026. What should presidents and university leaders be paying attention to going forward in the next year?
Yeah, so certainly, again, the continued implications of the House settlement. What is Title IX going to look like? How is it going to be applied? There are additional ongoing antitrust lawsuits challenging other aspects of the collegiate model. The we haven't. I think this is a new record for probably you and me. We haven't mentioned employment status yet,
Yeah.
and there there is, although the NLRB
Yes.
is no longer focused on college athletes as employees. There is still private litigation going on in Pennsylvania under the Fair Labor Standards Act, and that case is still pending in front of the district court. And that case, if the plaintiffs win, would declare pretty much all athletes in Division One as employees, not under the NLRA, but under the Fair Labor Standards Act, which would require schools to treat them as employees, pay them minimum wage and overtime.
Yeah.
And so the question of how do you treat your college athletes, and does that render them employees or not? And if they are employees, how do you handle that? And are there things you can do to reduce the quote unquote risk of college athletes become an employee? So that's certainly front and center for most universities. And I've talked a lot about this, and I think you were at the event that John Alger hosted at American
Yes.
University, where a big part of the discussion was, can we treat college athletics more like we treat college music and dance and other performing arts on campus? Another way of saying is, why do we treat college sports so differently? And when the violinist who is in the wind symphony for the band for their university, when they're rehearsing for hours on end, we don't say to that violinist, I wish you would spend more time on your studies rather than practicing the violin. And I wish you didn't care so much about that big recital you had or that big concert you had. But when the college football player or the lacrosse player is practicing, we ask them, why are you doing this instead of studying? And now there are lots of differences. I get it. But at its core, is there really something different than studying the performance of athletics and the educational value you can get from the performance than the educational value you can get from playing and performing music or theater or dance? I think there are going to be more and more schools, at least I hope, that will start to treat sports as a serious field of academic study. We have schools of music. We don't have schools of sport. Why not? We have lots of study of sport. We have lots of study of kinesiology and sports law and sports management and sports history. But if it ever comes to, well, let's look at their actual play, can we maybe think about the educational value, not just incidental educational value, because we all know the value that comes from playing sports and how leaders and employers look to hire athletes. But if we formalize that and create a curriculum at that, so that we can say with a straight face that not only is sports not interfering with your education, it is part of your education, it is enhancing your education, then I think we can look at a lot of this differently. Now, is that going to affect FBS football? No, I don't expect all of a sudden it to fundamentally change FBS football, but I think it can change a lot of our Olympic sports on campus and make it so that they are better integrated into the university and sports is seen as part of the academy and instead of something that is conflicting with the academy. And I think that can have some really beneficial effects in terms of employee status, potentially antitrust lawsuits. But I also just think it's the right thing to do is figure out what is that academic value. And just a quick side note, when I was at the Tulane conference championship game this weekend, you look, and anybody who goes to a football game, you look at how complicated the play calling is.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
That in itself is an education.
Yes, it is.
Reading and understanding and be able to communicate that, right? 95% of football is communicating, and then 5% of it is the execution. All right, maybe you don't want to give them academic credit for just playing, but what about all the studying and the learning and the writing and the comprehension that goes into um, learning the playbook, and not just football? Just think about all the sports. It's remarkable.
The leadership that you have to being part of a team, the giving of yourself to everybody else. I mean, those are valuable human characteristics.
Right, right,
Yeah,
and I think we undervalue them. So I think that's something else we can be looking for. The one of the other elephants. There's a lot of elephants in this room. It's a very large room, but sports gambling
yeah.
and the impact it's having on the integrity of the underlying game, which obviously matters because whether it's the pro or college level, part of the reason we love sports is because the game is decided on the field or on the ice or on the court. And if there's something interfering with that, whether it's performance enhancing drugs, or paying one set of players way more than another set of players, or whatever it might be, in this case, potentially match fixing, we're going to lose interest in the games. And
I
for
think
those
you're
who love sports, I think you need to be seriously concerned
yeah,
about that aspect of the integrity of the game, and then the impact it has on athletes. And
absolutely.
we've always known, even when sports gambling was illegal in most of the country, that the most vulnerable athletes would be the ones who were getting paid the least because it made sense financially for them to say, "Wait, you're offering me $100,000 to miss a couple of shots? I that's more money than I will make certainly all my years in college, but also I'm not going to have any professional prospects. So yeah, I'll do it." And we see that at the pro ranks too. But so there's that aspect, but then also the pressure now that there is widespread legalized gambling. Those who bet on a college game and a 19-year-old makes a mistake on the field,
Yeah,
and they hear about that, and
yeah,
we know that, and so we worry about all of that, and underlying it is, I just think the most important thing with all of this is the health, safety, well-being, and education of our athletes and
yeah,
our college students. And
yeah.
there are so many great things about college sports, but so many threats, and so much instability that it's up to each university president and their board to decide what role college athletics plays on their campus. But we have a real opportunity to rethink what this looks like in the long term in a way that can better protect the universities, the athletes, the fans, and everybody else involved.
I appreciate you saying that because that's why I launched this podcast. Yeah, I
And
appreciate it.
that's why I love listening to this podcast.
That's great. Gabe, thank you so much. I know you're crazy busy this time of year, but you've given my audience a lot to think about today, and I want to wish you a great 2025 holiday and a happy new year in 2026.
You as well. Thank you so much, Karen, and keep up the incredible work you do.
Thank you so much.